Well, hello, my fellow viewers. JRV96 here, bringing you a P3D flight. First one in 2 weeks since I've been caught up with life. But here I am. We are at Anchorage, Alaska, early morning hours, in which we're going to take the Fedex Boeing 777 freighter from Anchorage, Alaska to Guangzhou, China. So this is going to be a long haul flight lasting about 11 hours, in which we're going to be traversing through Alaska, Russia, Japan, into the East China Sea, towards Korea. We'll scale down the Chinese coastline all the way to Guangzhou, where we will visit FedEx's main hub in Asia. So this is Anchorage, Alaska, major cargo airport. It's a vital airport linking North America with Asia. So looking forward to doing this flight. And with that being said, we're going to go straight to the cockpit. So here we are. We're in the cold and dark configuration of the PMDG 777. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect ground power. So the way how you would turn the FMS on while in cold and dark is that you would hold down the menu button. So by doing that, I'm going to go to FS Actions, Ground Connections, and we're going to connect the ground power to the aircraft. So now we're going to go to the overhead panel. We'll turn on our external power, get the battery switch on, get our adheres to align. So I'm going to go down through this flow, make sure this is on, thrust asymmetrical is on, cabin utility, bus ties are good, generators are good. I'm gonna go ahead and arm the emergency lights. Window heat is on. I'm gonna leave the hydraulics as is until we get a little bit closer for pushback, along with the supernary signs, which is basically an alternative to the seatbelt signs for cargo aircrafts. Now I'm gonna make sure that I leave this, test the fire and overheat test, looks good to me. EEC mode is normal, this is good. Now I'll turn on the left aft fuel pump for now. We'll turn on the beacon light as well. And we're gonna come over to the air conditioning. We can turn the packs on. Basically everything else checks out on the overhead panel. So now we're gonna go to the front of the cockpit. Just gonna go ahead and test the oxygen supply. The captain's side looks good to me. And then I'm gonna do the same thing from the first officer's side. Also checks out as well. Then I'm gonna go ahead and set the parking brakes and make sure that our fish trim is normal, speed brakes are retracted, thrust levers are idle, flaps are up, and fuel control switches are in the cutoff position. Now, since this is going to be a VATSIM flight, there is no ATC available at Anchorage, so I'm just going to put in the Unicom frequency on 122.8 and also press this so that way we're transmitting and receiving COM 1. And we're going to continue to come all the way down. I'll just turn this on, and also pretty much everything else checks out. Transponder, we're going to change this to 2200 since obviously we're not going to be squawking VFR, especially above 18,000 feet for obvious reasons. Alright, so now basically the airplane is already powered up and we're going to go right into the FMS. So as you can see, I've also worked around with Chaseplane, so that way I have assigned individual presets for different views. So this is the preset that I assigned for the FMS, so that way I can see what I'm typing on the FMS alongside with the multifunctional display right there. So we're going to go to the FMS. Basically we're using AirAct 2010, Boeing 777-200, and the AirAct is current. And now we're going to go to the position initial page. So right now the reference airport is going to be Anchorage. So Papa Alpha November Charlie. And then we're going to click on that. And as you can see, usually whenever I put in the gate, it doesn't really work out. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take the last position, and so that way we can get our displays working. Now for the route itself, I've already got the route from Simbrief, so I'm just gonna type in the company route, which is gonna be from Anchorage, Alaska to Guangzhou, China. So I'm gonna click on this, and so far as I checked the weather beforehand, so they're using runway 33, and we are Fedex 159, which is the flight number. It is based off a real world flight. The only difference is that instead of using the 777, they actually use an MD-11 for this flight. And then making sure that all the route pretty much checks out. And we're gonna activate and execute. Now, as far as the departures into Anchorage, we're going to be using the Anchorage 9 departure. And as you can see, I've already looked at the charts well before getting to the airplane. So we'll do that. And then in reality, we'll get radar vectors to Noto, which is going to be our first fix. And then as for the arrival into Guangzhou, so far what I have filed is that we're going to fly the Aigono 1 Alpha departure, Aigono 1 Alpha arrival into Guangzhou, in which I plan to utilize runway 2. So this is the star I'm going to fly, and I'm not going to put in the runway yet until we get closer, because obviously the weather can change 11 to 12 hours from now. So I'm going to execute. And also, one thing to realize when you're flying in China is that they use the altitudes based off of meters. So for those of you viewers who are not familiar with flying in China, usually in the PMDG aircrafts, there's this switch right there called meters, in which if you click on that, basically what you're going to see is you're going to see the meter altitude on top right there, and also for the autopilot as well. So that way, in case if we do get ATC in China, and if the controller gives me the altitude in meters, basically this tool right there is useful, especially if you're going to be flying in this part of the world. Now we're going to go ahead and go right into the performance page. So I'm just going to grab the performance information from Simbrief. Actually, before I even get there, I need to adjust the payload accordingly on Simbrief. Usually this would be the first thing I would do before even powering up the aircraft. So the zero fuel weight is going to be, actually let me do the fuel first. The block fuel that we have was 223,000 pounds. So I'm going to put in 223,500. And also at the same time, what I can do is that we'll request catering and we'll request boarding as well. So that way we can at least load the cargo up as well. So that's going to be our zero fuel weight. And also what I'm going to do on the FMS on the right side is that I'm going to open up the right door. And then also I'll do the same for the left door. And then we can also open up the main deck cargo and the forward and aft cargo doors for GSX. Now going back to the performance page. Well, before I do that, just gonna double check to make sure that we have our payload is loaded correctly. Zero fuel weight is actually gonna be 516,300 pounds. So I'm gonna put in 516.3. So as you can see, we're almost loaded up to capacity. So we're loaded up to capacity and fuel checks out. And now we're gonna go to the performance page. So as you can see, our zero fuel weight was 516,300 pounds. So I'm gonna put in 516.3. The gross weight is 739,800 pounds. And as per the reserves, so on Simbrief I have 7,099, so I'm going to put in 7.1. And then our initial cruising altitude is going to be flight level 300 since we're pretty heavy. And our cost index is going to be 170. So we do that. Now we're going to go to the thrust limiter page. So as you can see, I could derate the engines if I would needed to, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to have to take a look at the takeoff performance since we're kind of heavy. So as for the takeoff performance, I'm going to put in the wind information. Right now there is no wind and the temperature is 1 degree Celsius, so that kind of helps us out in terms of performance. And let's see what flaps 15 will entail. So I'll put in the center of gravity speed, and for some reason saying V speed is unavailable, so I'm going to try to see if I can figure things out, see if a higher flap settings will do. And I kind of figured out why the V speeds are unavailable, mainly because derating the engines may not work. So it looks like even with flaps 20, V1 is 158 knots, and then with flaps 15, the V speeds are higher. So it looks like I'm going to have to use flaps 20 for takeoff, and about 6 degrees trim. So V1 is 158, VR is 164, and V2 is 170 knots. So now I'm going to go ahead and set up my MCP. I'm going to go B2 plus 10, so bringing back our B speeds. As you can see, they just finished loading the food up in the aircraft, so I'm going to go ahead and close the right front door. And B2 is 170, so we'll go 180 on our speed. So I've already armed the auto throttles, and we're going to go ahead and I'm going to put in VNav in the heading select for now, mainly because we would get radar vectors for the departure procedure. So I'm going to put in the runway heading, which is going to be 329 degrees. And then our initial altitude for the Anchorage 9 departure is 4,000 feet normally. And then we can expect, in this case, we'll expect flight level 300 10 minutes after departure. So we'll set that, turn on our flight directors, which is the one thing I forgot to do. Turn on heading select, VNav is going to be on, and then the flight director from the first officer's side will also be on as well. And then this is going to be somewhat of an ETOPS flight according to Simbrief. So in case if I have to divert for whatever reason throughout the flight, the first airport we're going to go to is Papa Alpha Charlie Delta. So I'm going to put that in. And usually I like to put in rings and stuff like that, so that way I'm aware of what potential airports I can divert to as I cross the Bering Sea. And then the next one after that is going to be Petropavlovsk Kamchatsky, which is in Russia. So that's Uniform Hotel Papa Papa. It looks like I'm going to be overflying that airport as well according to my route, so I'll just put in a 420 nautical mile ring. And those are the en route alternatives that I can use, especially if I'm going to be crossing the Bering Strait. Now there's a couple of other rings I'm going to put in, but I'm going to hold that off until later. Now, with that being said, we're going to go to the checklist. I've already tested the oxygen, flight instruments, so basically I have to get the latest altimeter settings. So right now it's reporting 2957. I'm going to reset the altimeter to 2957, and it actually does that automatically on all 3 altimeters. So we have our instruments set, we're at V2 plus 10, runway heading 4,000 feet, parking brake is set, and the fuel control switches are in the cutoff position. And then the before starts checklist, so assuming that we've already got fuel already, we're going to go ahead and turn on the supernumerary signs. That is the cargo equivalent to the seatbelt signs. So we'll put that on auto. MCP is already set up. Takeoff speeds are already set up. I've already completed pre-flight on the FMS. And the trim is going to be 6 degrees, in which I'll have to turn on the hydraulic demand switches in order to operate the trim. So I'm going to move this all the way down to 6 degrees. And that should be good enough right here. So the trim is set for takeoff. Well, welcome back, my fellow viewers. As you can see, we almost got all the cargo loaded up in the aircraft, so we're just about 5 minutes to pushback. So I'm going to go jump right back into the cockpit, and we'll start the APU, so that way we can disconnect the external power. And then at the same time, what I'm going to do is we'll turn on the beacon light, since the ground crew is almost done loading the cargo to the aircraft, and that will complete the before start checklist. Then what I'm going to do is we'll turn on all the fuel pumps, including the center tanks, and then we'll turn on the hydraulic demand air and primary hydraulic switches as well. So now we'll see that the APU will start to power up, and the way how you look at that is that you're going to go to the, I believe it's stat. So there's a stat page. So the APU is powering up, as you can see. So that way this is a good indication to know if the APU is running or not. And then you'll also see it on the ECAS. It will say APU running right here as well. So there it is. So with the APU on, I can go ahead and disconnect the ground power. So we're going to do this. We're going to go to ground connections. We'll remove the ground power. And then also what I'm going to do, just to stay ahead of the plane, is that I'll get rid of the chocks as well. So I'll have my FMS set up such that the first page, I'm going to have it as a legs page. The second one as the product progress page. I'm going to turn on the terrain on my side. And then the other side, we could put in weather. And also data on the FMSs as well. Now I'm just gonna do one last double check of the route to make sure everything that we see right here matches with what we got in our flight plan. So basically making sure all that is good. And there will be a couple of step climbs we'll do along the flight. Since we're starting off at flight level 300, eventually I'll have to take a look at my flight plan again. Eventually we'll continue our step climb probably past flight level 36 or flight level 380. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of waypoints, 16 pages of waypoints right there, in which if I were to put in each waypoint manually, it will pretty much take a long time just to get everything set up. Which is why that's the good thing of having Simbrief to load up the FMS, so that way this saves me a lot of time. So now I'm going to go back to the engine page. I'm going to get ready for engine start in just a few minutes, and all the cargo has been loaded on the aircraft. So waiting for the last cargo pallet to get in. And the APU is already connected, all the ground equipment is removed, and then as soon as that happens, we'll close the doors and get ready for pushback. So yeah, so right before pushback, GSX menu has stated, do I want to request de-icing treatment? Mainly because the outside air temperature is 1 degree Celsius. It's a good idea to at least get some anti-ice treatment before we take off, so that way we don't get iced up as we're climbing along. So I'll close all the cargo doors, wait for the de-icing trucks to show up, and then we'll get our de-icing treatment. Alright, looks like we're now ready for pushback, and then according to GSX, we have to hold off on the engine start until pushback is completed and the parking brakes are set due to icy conditions. Alright, so now I'm just going to make sure everything works out. I'm just going to reset the TCAS and TARA, and then we're going to swing the nose left, tail right. I'll just go ahead and turn on the nav light. Alright, so we're going to go nose left, tail right.
Departure check completed. Bypass bin inserted. Commencing push. Due to icing conditions, please stand by for engine start until push completed and brakes set.
So yeah, so it looks like we're going to have to hold off on the engine start for now. But in the meantime, I can provide you guys with the nose camera. So that way you can see the pushback truck in motion. And we do have some clouds, as you can see. Looks like I'm going to need to use the engine and wing anti-ice for the climb. So that way you get a good view of what it's like to be the pushback tug. I'm also going to check outside as well to make sure that we don't hit any other aircrafts that are parked on the other side of the ramp. So I did put AI traffic in the sim, courtesy of Alpha India Group. So as you can see now, they're trying to make sure that hopefully we get on this yellow line. Well, I actually tell you what, that was kind of odd how they ended the pushback right away, but no matter. So in the meantime, we'll go ahead and start engine number 2. Packs will come off automatically whenever we do engine starts. Just waiting for that N2 to rise to about 20 to 25%, and then we'll put in the fuel. Alright, fuel comes on. And the engine should ignite. Alright, there's engine number 2. Engine number 2 has stabilized. I'm going to go ahead and start number 1. Alright, N2 should be rising. And now I'm going to put in the fuel. And also another thing I also forgot to do is to set the time to run. Usually I like to do that before pushback, so that way I take a note of how long the flight is. Alright, there goes our N2, there goes our EGT. And we got a good start on both engines. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the tug, and both engines are up and running. So now we're going to go back to the checklist page. Anti-ice, it looks like I'm going to need the wing and engine anti-ice, at least for a little bit before we exit the cloud. So we're going to go ahead, actually it's already set to auto, but I'll leave it on auto for now. Recall, I'm going to do the recall check. So far there's nothing on the ECAS, which is good. And I've already set the auto brakes to RTO, and then we'll check our flight controls. So full left, full right, neutral, full up, full down, neutral, full left, full right, neutral. So flight controls check out. And we're gonna go back to the checklist, and I'm just waiting on the ground equipment to clear. So they should be clearing any second now.
Right is clear.
Alright, my right side is clear, and so is my left side. So as soon as they are out of the way, then I'll go ahead and turn on the taxi light. So that completes that part of the checklist. And then also at the same time, what I can do is do the forward takeoff checklist, in which we're going to set our flaps to 20, which is the most amount of flaps I'll use for takeoff in the 777. Obviously, I'm going to have to use flaps 20 because we're heavy and the V speeds are pretty high. So now the ground ops is clear. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the taxi light, and then we are ready to taxi. So that will complete that part of the checklist as soon as the flaps retract, and then we're going to go back to the engine page. Looks like they're using runway 15 according to the AI. So not that, I gotta probably take that into consideration. Well, welcome back, my fellow viewers. As you saw right there with that Alaska Airlines 737, they've switched the runways to runway 15 now, in which Active Sky is saying winds 150 at 6. So I'm going to take the runway in which I'm going to take off into the wind to help me out with my takeoff performance. Now for the departure procedure, it has changed slightly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fly runway heading to 600 feet, and it's going to be a climbing right turn to a heading of 201 degrees, where I'm going to get vectors for the fix of nodal. So now, as you can see, we're almost coming up to the hold short line, and there's nobody landing runway 15. I'll have to check to see if anybody is using runway 7 on the other side of the field. So I'm just going to stop right here, turn on my lights. Active Sky is now saying winds 160 at 5. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the landing lights, get the strobes on as well. Local light I may not going to need because it's starting to get lighter outside. Squawks are set, TCAS, TARA, and we are good to go for takeoff. Now I'm going to taxi onto the runway. Since I'm heavy, I'm going to utilize all available runway that we have. So basically I'm going to go right out to the very beginning of the runway. There's runway 15. As you can see, nobody's crossing the runway, which is good.
On runway 14.
Alright, making sure that we're lined up with the runway. And we're going to advance the throttle to about 40% N1, and then hit the toga button. Alright, so the toga button is already activated. And we're at 98% N1. Alright, airspeed's coming alive. I do see someone approaching runway 15. Hopefully I can lift off before he gets close. Alright. Coming up on 140.
V1. Rotate. V2.
And we're airborne. Looks like we got a 747 Dreamlifter at Alaska, which is pretty cool. Positive rate of climb, gears coming up. And now I'm going to start making my right turn where I would vector myself to nodal. As you can see, one thing I forgot to do was to turn off the APU. That was not good right there. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and retract the flaps to 15. And I need to really lower that nose just a bit because I'll get to 4,000 feet rather relatively quickly. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and turn on the autopilot. We'll set our altitude bug to flight level 330. Correction, flight level 300. Got our heading select. And then we're going to go direct to nodal. And look at that terrain right there. So we'll go direct to nodal, hit the L nav. And we'll go flaps 5. I'm going to keep retracting the flaps. So now flaps 1. There's that cruise ship in the background. And then now we're going to go flaps up. And then I'll quickly run through the after takeoff checklist. So this is good. I'm going to override this checklist. Landing gears are up, and then the flaps should be coming back up. And now I need to intervene on the speed because for some reason, I don't know why, the airplane wants to go beyond 250 knots during the cruise. So quick thinking, I was able to do that. And then also I need to get the VNav under control so that way at least we can get a climb rate going as well. So with quick thinking on my part, I was able to fix myself right here. Only thing is we're probably above by 4 knots, but eventually the airplane will fix itself. So the after takeoff checklist is complete. Go back to the engine page. So as you can see, above 10,000 feet, we'll turn off the landing lights, and by the time when we reach transition altitude, we will reset the altimeter to 29902. So definitely I want to be able to pass nodal at or above 13,700, in which I'm going to zoom in. You can see this red terrain right there, in which the highest terrain from what I see is 11,000 feet. But definitely, since we're about 50 miles from nodal, we'll be able to clear the terrain, no problems whatsoever. And it looks like the clouds, there's not as much clouds as I thought it would be, so pretty much no need for the anti-ice. Usually when you need it is right before you're going to be flying into areas of visible moisture, which this is an area of visible moisture, and that the outside air temperature is below freezing. So as you can see, it's slightly above freezing at 1 degree Celsius. Well then, my fellow viewers, it looks like I'll be able to clear the terrain at nodal. So that pretty much concludes the departure portion of the flight. So this is going to be an 11-hour long haul flight all the way to Guangzhou, China. So I'm going to leave the scene as is, and I'll provide you guys with some cinematics for the cruise, and I'll see you guys for the descent. Well, welcome back, my fellow viewers. As you can see, we just descended below 10,000 feet, and I'm gonna just go ahead and slow the airplane down to about 180 knots, so that way we can make the turn to intercept the localizer. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and get the airplane to slow down a bit. As you can see, we're in this thick cloud layer right here, as we'll be out of it in just a little while. Alright, so now what I've done is I've already put flaps 1. I set the auto brakes to 1, so that way we're not gonna be in the rush to get out of the runway pretty soon. So now I'm gonna go ahead and throw flaps 5. In this case, I'm using the speed brakes to help me slow down to about 180 knots, as we're now going to make the turn to intercept the localizer right there. Alright, so now in this case I'm going to go ahead and arm the approach. So right now we're at flaps 5, 180 knots. And now looking at the speed restriction on the chart, we're going to maintain 180 knots until about 8 DME, so that's a little bit past the final approach fix. Then 160 knots until the 6 DME. So I'll take note of the speeds that we have to maintain. All right, so now in this case I'm going to go ahead and throw flaps 15. So that way I'll have an easier time intercepting the localizer, especially in the case of parallel runways, since Guangzhou has 3 parallel runways. So now I'm going to go ahead and reduce the speed brakes. We're at flaps 15, and in just a few minutes we should be able to intercept the localizer as is. Now there is an AI traffic off to our 11 o'clock somewhere that's flying below us, so I do have AI traffic turned on, as now we're going to go ahead and make this turn to join the localizer. So it looks like Golf 407 was the waypoint that I just passed. The final approach fix is defined as the 9 DME of the localizer, which I have the DME distance right here. Right now we're at 180 knots, still in the clouds, but when we get down below 3,000 feet we should be able to clear. As you can see, we've already captured the localizer, still have not caught the glide slope yet. And then what I'll do actually is that I'll probably hold my altitude at 4,000 for now and let the glide slope come alive, so that way I'll be able to intercept it a little bit earlier rather than doing it at the final approach fix. And as you can see, we could just see the bottom of this cloud layer right there. And then once we're able to intercept the localizer, then I'll most likely take control of the aircraft. As you can see, we're about 16 miles away from the airport, so this is pretty much a long ILS approach to the runway. Any second now the glide slope should come alive, and which is slowly starting to come down right there on the PFD. And then basically my go around altitude is going to be, in this case, 4930. That's 1,500 meters. So I'm just going to bug the altitude of 5,000 upon capturing the glide slope, in case if I have to go missed. Alright, glide slope is slowly coming alive. and the autopilot should be able to capture it pretty soon. So our final approach speed is 146 knots, so I always like to add +5 to that speed. So we're going to go 151 knots as our final approach speed, in which the ideal descent rate is going to be somewhere around 800 feet per minute. And as you can see, the autopilot has already captured the glide slope. Upon reaching the final approach fix, that's when I'm going to start to drop the gear. So now now we're starting to pick up speed a little. So now we're about 2 miles from final approach fix. I'm going to go ahead and lower the gear to help me slow down a little bit, because right now we're almost at 200 knots, and this is where I don't want to be on final. So I'm using the gear to help me slow the plane down a bit. And there's the airport directly in front of us. It's a massive airport located in a massive city, just about 100 miles northwest of Hong Kong. Alright, so now we've already captured the glide slope, and I'm going to go ahead and slow down to about 160 knots since we've already passed the final approach fix. And then we'll go flaps 25. And once when we're less than 6 miles away from the airport, I'll take manual control of the aircraft, where we'll slow down to BREF, and essentially I'll hand fly the airplane to the runway. Now we're going to go flaps 25. We're about 7.7 to go, so I'm just going to hold it at 160 knots. And then I'm going to go ahead and start to slow down right after. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and slow down the final approach speed. So VREF 146, I'm going to go down to 151. We'll drop the last set of flaps. In this case, we're doing flaps 30, 151 knots. And now I'm going to go ahead and take manual control of the aircraft. The autopilot disengage along with the auto throttles. Now I might need to return on the autopilot in the approach. In this case, there's a feature in the PMDG that I forgot to change, which is the resettable siren. There we go. I have to do this in the fly right there. Now I'm going to disengage the autopilot and the auto throttles, kind of distracting me right there on the approach. So now I have speed to bleed off right here. Alright, let's get that sight view in place. Yeah, the one thing I don't like about this bridge scenery is how the trees really stand out when the visibility is not really that great. Kind of makes it a little unrealistic right there, especially when you're landing in hazy conditions. Alright, so now I'm getting a little low, so I'm going to add some power, get back on that glide slope right away. And while maintaining the airspeed, this will help us out. Okay. Still descending a little too fast to maintain that 3-degree glide path, so I'm fixing that. And we got gear down 3 greens, flaps 30, Q&H is correct. Touchdown. 80 knots. I'm going to disengage reverse thrust and take control of the brakes. I'm off on the taxiway that I plan to exit, which is Mike 3, so we're going to take the taxiway off to our right. And then once when we vacate the runway, I'm going to go ahead and do my after takeoff my after landing checklist. Get the airplane cleaned up and into the FedEx cargo ramp, as you can see directly in front of us. Alright, so now everything has been checked out. After landing checklist, I'm going to go ahead and retract all the flaps. Speed brakes are fully retracted. Auto brakes are off. Turn off the landing lights, then taxi lights. And then we're going to go ahead and flick on the APU. And everything else checks out. Just get this back on. And now we're going to go to the FedEx ramp. Alright, looks like I think I may have space to fit in between the 7.5 and the 777 AI in between this cargo ramp right there, so I'm just gonna go ahead and take it. Alright, so now as I'm pulling into the ramp, usually I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the taxi light once when I get this aircraft straightened up. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off, and the wingtip clearance should be good enough for me to fit into this ramp. So that's going to be Foxtrot X-Ray 09er as our gate. Alright, I should be pretty much just about straight. And I'll go straight ahead. And I say right around here pretty much does it right. Now I'm going to go ahead and shut the airplane down, in which we're going to go ahead and do the securing aircraft checklist. So I'm going to go back to the checklist menu. Alright, so now taxi lights are already turned off, APU is on. I'm going to go ahead and kill the engines. And then at the same time, we're going to go back to the overhead panel. We'll turn off our lights, turn off the fuel pumps. And we'll turn off the hydraulic panels. Make sure that is off. And parking brake is already set. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the water radar on both ends. And also set the TCAS to standby as well. And that pretty much concludes the shutdown checklist, and then I'll call GSX to unload the cargo, and then that pretty much concludes the flight. Okay, well then, my fellow viewers, that concludes the end of this video. So if you have enjoyed the long haul flight, feel free to hit the like button, and also feel free to hit the subscribe button, JRV96, where I will be uploading P3D and FS 2020 contents usually every weekend or so. Now that I've been caught up with real life stuff, I'll try my best to make sure that I upload video contents usually every weekend or so. And with that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.